Where does money really come from? Hi, I'm Teacher Luke, and welcome to this story on the origins of money. Chapter 1: The Birth of Money. Have you ever tried to trade something without using money? Maybe you swapped a toy with a friend when you were a child. Or perhaps you've exchanged your time for help, like cooking dinner for someone who later fixed your bike. How did it feel? Was it simple, or was it a little complicated? Write your answer in the comments because I'd love to hear your stories. Now, let me take you on a journey. To understand where money really comes from, we have to step back in time. Far, far back, before banks, before coins, and before paper bills. We have to enter a world where money did not exist at all. Long ago, human communities lived without coins or notes. People survived by hunting, gathering, and later farming. When they needed something, they had two options. They could make it themselves, or they could exchange with others. This is what we call barter. Imagine a farmer who grew wheat but needed shoes. He would go to the shoemaker and say, "I'll give you 20 kilos of wheat if you make me a pair of shoes." On the surface, this sounds fair. But what if the shoemaker didn't want wheat? Maybe he wanted honey instead. Suddenly, the deal became very complicated. This problem is known as the double coincidence of wants. For a trade to work, both people had to want exactly what the other person had at the same time. If not, the trade failed. You can probably already see why this was not very efficient. Communities needed an easier way to exchange goods and services. So, they began to look for objects that everyone in the community valued. Objects that could act as a common middle step in trade. These objects had to be useful, rare, and trusted. In some parts of the world, people used cowrie shells, small, shiny shells from the ocean. In other regions, they used salt, which was essential for preserving food. In fact, the word salary comes from sal, the Latin word for salt, because Roman soldiers were sometimes paid with it. Other groups used beads, stones, or even cattle. What mattered was not the object itself, but the agreement. If people believed something had value, then it could serve as money. Let me share a quick story from my own life. Years ago, when I was a university student, I shared a house with 4 other people. We didn't have much money, and sometimes we didn't even use it. Instead, we created our own little system of trade. For example, one housemate was brilliant at cooking. Another was always happy to drive us places because he had an old car. My skill was helping with essays and proofreading English. We often traded without money. If my housemate cooked dinner 3 times a week, I would help him improve his essay for a course. If someone drove us to a party outside town, we promised to cover his petrol costs later, or we helped with cleaning the house. It wasn't a perfect system. Sometimes people forgot their promises. Sometimes one person felt they gave more than they received. But in many ways, it reminded me of those early human exchanges. It showed me why societies needed something more reliable, a system that recorded value clearly and fairly. As societies grew larger, trade expanded. Farmers wanted to exchange goods with people they didn't know personally. Traders began to travel across long distances, meeting strangers from other cultures. In these situations, barter was simply too difficult. That's when metals like gold, silver, and copper entered the story. Why metals? Because they had special qualities. They were durable. They didn't rot or break easily. They were divisible. You could melt them down or cut them into smaller pieces. They were rare. Not everyone could find them, so they kept their value. They were also attractive. People enjoyed the shine and beauty of gold and silver. Soon, communities started shaping these metals into coins. At first, they were just lumps stamped with a mark. Later, kings and rulers placed their faces or symbols on the coins to guarantee their value. For the first time, people could carry money in their pockets. Imagine the freedom. A farmer didn't have to bring heavy bags of wheat to market anymore. He could simply sell the wheat for coins and then use the coins to buy shoes, tools, or anything else he needed. Here's something interesting. Money itself has no real use. You cannot eat a coin, and a paper note cannot keep you warm at night. The power of money comes from trust. When you accept money in exchange for your work, you trust that someone else will also accept that same money tomorrow when you want to buy food. This trust is built on social agreement. Think about it. If tomorrow everyone in your country suddenly refused to accept the national currency, the notes in your wallet would be useless pieces of paper. That's a strange thought, isn't it? Coins were a great invention, but they were still heavy. As trade spread across continents, carrying sacks of silver and gold became dangerous and inconvenient. Merchants looked for a new solution. In China, over 1,000 years ago, traders began using paper money. Instead of carrying metal, they carried notes issued by the government or trusted merchants. These notes promised that the holder could exchange them for real value, like silver if necessary. Europe adopted this system much later, especially as banking developed. Banks issued paper notes as receipts for gold stored in their vaults. People trusted the banks, so the notes became easier to use than the gold itself. Over time, governments stepped in and took control. They created official banknotes, declaring them legal tender. This meant everyone had to accept them as payment. Once again, the system only worked because people trusted that the paper really represented value. At this point in history, money was no longer just a tool of trade. It was becoming part of daily life, shaping human behavior and even emotions. Think about your own relationship with money. Have you ever felt proud when you earned your first paycheck? Have you ever worried when you didn't have enough to pay for something important? Money is not just economic, it's deeply personal. When I was a teenager, I had a part-time job delivering newspapers. The first time I received money in an envelope, I felt powerful. I could buy things without asking my parents, but soon I realized that the money disappeared quickly. A new CD here, a trip to the cinema there. It taught me an important lesson. Money was valuable not only because of what it could buy, but also because of the choices it allowed me to make. So, where did money really come from? Not from governments printing paper, not even from banks, at least not in the beginning. Money was born from human need, the need to trade, to share value, and to make life simpler. It started with barter, moved through shells and salt, grew into coins of gold and silver, and finally transformed into paper notes that represented trust. Money is, at its heart, a human invention. It exists because we agree to believe in it together. So, here's my final question for you. If you lived thousands of years ago, what object in your life today would you choose as money? Would it be something small and shiny, like a coin? Or something practical, like food or tools? Share your answer in the comments. I'm curious what modern objects you think could have become money in the past. Chapter 2. The Modern Money Machine. Let me ask you a simple question. When you hear the phrase making money, what picture comes into your mind? Do you imagine big machines in a factory printing out colorful notes? Or maybe you see coins being pressed in a noisy mint? Write your answer in the comments. I want to know your first image of money creation. Now, here's a surprise. That picture is mostly a myth. Yes, governments do print notes and mint coins, but that is not where most of our money comes from today. In fact, more than 90% of the money in circulation isn't printed at all. It is created in a very different way inside the modern banking system. Most people grow up with a simple story. The government prints money, gives it to people, and that's it. If the government prints too much, there's inflation. If they don't print enough, there's poverty. This story is neat and easy to imagine, but it's not how the system truly works. Let me share a little personal story. When I was younger, I went on a school trip to a museum that had an old printing press. The guide showed us how governments once produced their notes. The machine made a loud clunk each time a fresh piece of paper money was pressed. My classmates and I stared in amazement. I remember whispering to my friend, "So this is how all money is made." Of course, I later discovered that the printing press is only a tiny piece of the picture. In reality, the true money machine is much quieter. It doesn't make clunking sounds. Instead, it lives in computer systems inside banks. Here's the surprising truth. Banks create money every single time they give out a loan. Imagine you go to your local bank and ask for a loan to buy a car. You sign the paperwork and the bank agrees to lend you $10,000. What happens next? Do they go to a vault, open a safe, and hand you a bag of coins? Not at all. Instead, the bank simply types the number 10,000 into your account on a computer. That's it. From nowhere, brand new money has entered the economy. You then use that 10,000 to buy the car. The car dealer pays their workers, suppliers, and maybe even their own loans. Bit by bit, that new money spreads into the system. This is called fractional reserve banking, and it is the main way money is created today. Banks don't just move existing money around, they actually generate new money by lending. To make this clearer, let's slow down and follow the process step by step. You deposit money. Imagine you put $1,000 into your bank account. The bank keeps a fraction. By law, the bank must keep a small part of that deposit in reserve, let's say 10%. So they hold $100 safely. The rest is lent out. The other $900 can be loaned to someone else. That loan becomes someone else's deposit. When the borrower spends the $900, maybe on new furniture, the furniture shop deposits it into their bank. Now that $900 is recorded as real money. The cycle repeats. The bank holding the $900 keeps 10% in reserve, 90, and lends out the rest, 810. Step by step, the original $1,000 turns into many thousands circulating in the economy. The money isn't printed, it is created through loans. Now you might wonder, if banks can create money so easily, what stops them from creating too much? That's where central banks come in. A central bank, like the Federal Reserve in the United States or the European Central Bank in Europe, has two big jobs: to keep the economy stable, to control inflation by influencing how much money flows through the system. They do this in several ways. Interest rates. If they want to slow down borrowing, they raise interest rates. Loans become more expensive, so fewer people borrow. Reserve requirements. They can change the percentage of deposits banks must keep in reserve. Buying and selling assets. Central banks can also add money into the system by buying government bonds or remove it by selling them. Central banks are often described as the banks for banks. They don't deal with you or me directly, but they shape the environment in which commercial banks operate. When I was in my 20s, I applied for my first credit card. I was nervous. I thought the bank would check a vault somewhere to make sure they had the money ready for me. Of course, what really happened was far simpler. They just created a line of credit on my account. In that moment, the bank increased the total amount of money in existence, all by changing a number on a screen. It felt magical, but it also felt dangerous, because I knew that if I spent too much and couldn't pay it back, the bank wouldn't lose money. I would. And that's the other side of the story. Banks create money by creating debt. For every new loan, there is also an obligation to repay. This system explains why modern economies are built on borrowing and lending. Without loans, there would be far less money. If banks stopped lending tomorrow, the amount of money in the economy would shrink dramatically. Businesses wouldn't have funds to expand, people couldn't buy homes, and governments would struggle to finance projects. Debt, then, isn't just a personal problem, it's the engine of the money system. Every time someone borrows, new money is born. Every time they repay, that money disappears back into the system. Here's something to think about. People often say there's not enough money in the world, but in truth, money is not a fixed amount like gold or oil. It can expand or shrink depending on how much lending and borrowing happens. In this sense, money is elastic. It stretches when confidence is high and people borrow more. It contracts during crises when people save instead of spending. This elasticity is powerful, but it's also dangerous. If too much money is created, we get inflation. Prices rise because too many dollars are chasing too few goods. If too little money is created, we get recession. Businesses close, jobs are lost, and the economy slows down. At the heart of this machine is one simple idea: trust. People trust that banks will honor their accounts. They trust that the government will back up the system. And they trust that tomorrow the money in their accounts will still buy food and rent. Without trust, the system collapses. Think about what happens when a bank run occurs. When people panic and try to withdraw their money all at once. Suddenly, the illusion is broken and the bank doesn't have enough cash on hand. That's why governments often step in to guarantee deposits. So now we see the truth. Modern money does not really come from printing presses. It comes from lending. It comes from numbers typed into computer systems. It is born as credit and dies as debt. This doesn't make it less real. When you use your bank card to pay for groceries, the supermarket doesn't care whether the money was printed on paper or created digitally. What matters is that the system of trust keeps working. Here's my question for you. Have you ever borrowed money, even a small amount, and realized later that it was created almost out of nothing? Maybe with a credit card, a student loan, or even an overdraft? How did it feel to spend money that you technically didn't have yet? Write your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your experience. Chapter 3: The Value and Future of Money. Let me start with a question. Why does money have value? A coin is just metal. A note is just printed paper. Even the numbers in your online banking app are just digital signals. So why do we treat them as precious? Why can you exchange them for food, clothes, or even a plane ticket? Write your answer in the comments before we dive in. The short answer is trust. Money works only because we all agree to believe in it. When you accept money for your work, you trust that you'll be able to spend it tomorrow. The shopkeeper trusts that the supplier will accept it. The supplier trusts that the bank will process it. In the end, money is a shared story, one of the biggest human agreements in history. This idea can feel strange, almost magical. Imagine showing a modern banknote to someone from the distant past. They might laugh and say, "Why would anyone trade real goods for a piece of paper?" Yet today, billions of people do it every single day. For this trust to hold, there must be strong support. That's why most modern currencies are backed not by gold or silver, but by the power of governments. When a note says, "This is legal tender," it means everyone in that country is required to accept it for payment. This is what economists call fiat money. The word fiat means "let it be done" in Latin. In other words, money has value because the government declares it and because people continue to believe in that declaration. When governments manage money well, people keep trusting. But when governments mismanage, printing too much or losing control, trust collapses. That's when we see hyperinflation. I remember first reading about Zimbabwe in the early 2000s. The government printed enormous amounts of money, and soon prices went wild. A loaf of bread could cost billions of Zimbabwean dollars. People carried bags of notes just to buy groceries. Some even used the paper money as wallpaper because it was cheaper than buying real paper. This example shows how fragile trust can be. Once people lose faith in money, it stops functioning as money. Even when inflation is smaller, we still feel it in daily life. I'm sure you've noticed how prices seem to rise year after year. Maybe your grandparents talk about buying bread for a few cents, while today it costs much more. That's inflation, the gradual fall in the value of money over time. I still remember when I was a teenager saving for my first mobile phone. The model I wanted cost about £100. It took me months of weekend work to save enough. But by the time I had the money, the price had already gone up slightly. That tiny increase taught me the power of inflation. Money in your pocket slowly loses value if prices keep rising. Another strange truth is that money is deeply psychological. We don't just use it to buy things. We connect it to our feelings of safety, success, and even self-worth. Think about how you feel when you receive your first paycheck, or when you save enough to buy something special. That sense of pride and security doesn't come from the paper or the number in your account. It comes from what money represents: freedom, possibility, and choice. On the other hand, think about how stressful it feels when money runs short. Worry, arguments, and fear often follow. Money may be an invention, but its impact on our emotions is very real. So, what comes next? The world of money is changing faster than ever. Most of us already use digital money every day. When you tap your card or send money through an app, no physical coins or notes move. Just numbers, moving at the speed of light across computer networks. But beyond this, we see new experiments. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are one example. These are digital currencies that don't rely on governments or banks. Instead, they use blockchain technology, a kind of shared digital record, to create trust. Some people believe cryptocurrencies are the future, faster, more private, and independent of political power. Others warn that they are risky, unstable, and sometimes used for crime. Governments have noticed this trend. That's why many central banks are exploring their own versions of digital money, called CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Imagine using an app on your phone where your money comes directly from the central bank instead of a commercial bank. That could make payments faster and cheaper. But it also raises big questions about privacy and control. Let me share something personal. I remember the first time I used an online payment service. It felt almost unbelievable to send money with just a few clicks. I was nervous. Would the money really arrive? Would the system work? It did. My friend received the payment instantly, and soon I was paying for books, music, and even rent online. Over time, my trust in digital money grew. Today, I hardly carry cash at all. That small moment of trust expanded into a new habit, just as society itself is moving from paper and coins to digital systems. Looking ahead, the big question is not just how money will look, but what it will mean. Will cryptocurrencies replace traditional money? Will governments use digital currencies to track every payment? Will inflation or crises weaken our trust in fiat money? And perhaps the most personal question of all, will money continue to control our lives, or will we find new ways to measure value beyond numbers in a bank account? So, where does money really come from? We've seen that it began as barter, grew into coins and notes, and now exists mostly as numbers on screens. But behind every form, the key is the same: trust. Money works only because we believe in it together. The future of money is uncertain, but one thing is clear: money will continue to change. And as it changes, so will our societies, our relationships, and even our feelings about ourselves. Now, I want to leave you with one final question. What do you think money will look like in 50 years? Will we still use coins and notes? Or will everything be digital? Or maybe will we find a completely new system beyond money itself? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your vision of the future.